Hey guys, welcome to the video. Welcome to my garage. In this video, we're going to be going over how bypass shock absorbers operate. Now, I'm not going to sit here and blow smoke up your butt acting like I'm the greatest bypass shock absorber technician there ever was, because I'm not. This is the first pair of bypass shock absorbers I've ever owned. I'm designing the rear suspension of Ratchet to use bypass shock absorbers. Because these are the first set I've ever owned, although I'm familiar with the concept as to how they work, I wasn't familiar with exactly how they work. And with me, when I install stuff on this Baja and I want to be able to tune it and adjust it, I like to understand 100% how that works. And so when I got these shock absorbers, the first thing I did is take them apart. And that includes the valving that's in the bypasses and everything. So that when I do have Ratchet out and I'm trying to adjust his suspension, I want to 100% understand, when I'm adjusting these things, how is that going to affect the operation of the shock absorber? So I took it apart so that I fully understand how that works. So I decided, since I did that, I'll do a video with you guys showing the teardown of these bypass shock absorbers and how exactly they work. So I've got the two bypass shocks here. This one, I've got the remote reservoir clamped onto the shock because I really don't like working on them when the remote reservoir's banging all over the place. So this is the one we're going to take apart. This one, let's do a real quick rundown of how a bypass works. As the shock comes in or extends out, these are triple bypass shock absorbers. These two bypasses are for the compression stroke. This bypass is for the extension stroke. So as the piston's coming in, it's going to want to push fluid through these bypasses back around behind the piston. As the piston makes its way this way and passes these bypass ports, then it no longer bypasses. So as the piston would pass this, the shock absorber would have a little bit more power, and then as it would pass this port, it would have even more power. I will say these ports, I believe, come a little bit too far up. I think this one should be about 2 inches further back. This one should be 4, 5, or 6 inches further back this way. But regardless, they are what they are. And then this port is the port so that when the piston is extending and the piston's going this way, these are valves as well as check valves. So as the piston's going this way, they can push through these tubes. They cannot through this one because that's a check valve. And then when the piston's going this way, it will bypass this way, but it will not come out of these two because these are check valves. So that's the quick rundown of how a bypass shock absorber works. But like I told you, if I'm going to be out there tuning it and adjusting it, I want to know exactly how all of this works. So I'm going to get this one out of there, and let's take this shock and actually tear some of these components down. I'm not going to dump the fluid and tear every single piece of it down, but let's take a look inside here. Let's take a look at the piston. And let's pop these valves apart so we can see how they work. So the first thing we need to do is pull the little Schrader off here. And because I'm going to take this apart, I'm going to bleed off any pressure. I know that I've only got this set to like 50 psi, but either way, when you take these apart, you want to have no charge in there. Alright, so that's empty. This should push in. Okay, so that's loose. But if you can see, when I push this in, it pushes back out. And that's because everything is sealed real tight. And when I push this, I'm compressing the air, and it wants to push back out. I push this in, and there's a circlip I want to get out of there. But I'm going to pull this Schrader out so that I can push it out, and it'll stay out. Now that the Schrader's not in there, you can push and pull this, and because it's letting air through it, it doesn't stay where it doesn't keep pushing back. Now I've got this little C-clip or circlip, whatever you call it, that I need to pull out. And then this, it's usually a little difficult to get these out the last portion because the O-rings get caught on the groove that little clip went into. So I'm going to put my cap back on here, and like a barbarian, I'm going to grab it with pliers just so that I can pull it a little bit. Oh, there we go. So if you look in there, what you're seeing is the piston. On the back side of that piston is the oil. When you charge these with nitrogen, you fill up this cavity and it pushes that piston, and that keeps pressure on your fluid. And there's really not too much else to this. That's the little port for your Schrader. There's a little O-ring on there that seals it, and you saw how it floats in there. So this is the exact same setup that the coilover shock absorbers had, so no major surprises there. So I'm going to throw that back together. I'm not going to put the Schrader in there yet because I'm going to take the shock absorber further apart, and I don't want the piston pushing fluid out as I take other pieces apart. So I'm going to just leave these off for now. Okay, now I've got the shock absorber in the vise here so that this end is sticking up, and I need to get this cap off so that we can pull the piston out of here. So the first thing I need to do, holy crap, those are tight. Oh, mother may I. All right, got that one broke loose. Oh, shit. Damn it, that's tight. All right, I got a longer Allen wrench. That feels like a pretty good fit. You know, I'm worried about stripping it, but that broke that loose. And this one is loose, as long as this one pops loose. Okay. I think they get a little crazy with the Loctite. Alright, now, yeah, this should lift right off. And then what we have here is a piston that's kind of similar to the one that we looked at in the reservoir. We need to push this down a little bit, and then there's another clip that we need to pop off, and then this will pull out. This is a little bit more difficult to pull out because it's got seals on it, it's got the piston behind it, and there's more seals. So first let me see if I can push this down so I can get access to the clips. So I've got a tool here that I made quite a while ago for kind of breaking pieces like this loose. And what it is it's just a piece of tube that I cut in half, and I line the inside with duct tape just because I'm always nervous about scratching the shaft. So what you do is you put it on here like this, and you just wrap it around, and then you take the top cap down and you make sure it's not touching on the seal that's up here, and it just allows you a much better way to put some pressure on here. So I'll push on this and hopefully break that loose like this. There we go. So if you look in here, now that I've got this pushed down, this little clip I'm going to pop out, and then I'm going to pull the shaft, and when I pull the shaft out, piston's going to come up, and then I'll have to pop that out, and it's going to be a real ugly process, and a bunch of fluid's going to spill, and it's not fun, but it'll come out. All right, so just like I did on the reservoir, get my little tool in here and pop off the ring. So in anticipation of this being a mess, I like to try to set rags up to catch as much of it as possible. Even though that might be impossible, I do what I can to keep things clean. All right, now that I've got this cap broken loose, and this is the one that's got the seals in it, what I have here is the piston. The piston is kind of under a vacuum right now because there's no air between it and the fluid. So at this point, I need to pull this out just really, really slow so that it can break the seal and some air can get in there as I pull it out. Some fluid's going to come out, but if I go real slow, it shouldn't be too bad. Alright, so that was cool. That wasn't too bad. There's the inside of the shock body, and there's the fluid sitting in there. And then this is the piston. This is the part that I had to pop out, and the little groove goes in there. This piece on the outside here is what they call the piston seal. And if you get a rebuild kit, you get a new one of these, because this is the part that actually slides up and down the shock body as the shock is going in and out. This is just a washer, and that's another washer and your nut. And if you look here, all of these plates that are stacked, that's your valving. If this piston was, let's say, being compressed, so it was traveling this way into the shock body and the fluid had to move through it this way, it wouldn't get through these discs because these are basically valves and they would just push themselves shut. But it would travel through these slots, and the backside of those slots come out at these valves, and they look closed now. If fluid was traveling through there at pressure, it would deflect these and they would bend out and allow the fluid to go through there. So you can take the nut off of these and you can change these plates. They call them valve plates. And you can put in different diameters, different thicknesses, different stacks, whatever you want to do. It's kind of infinite at that point, but most manufacturers have a chart, and you can set it up for, 20, 30, 40, 50, 80, 90, all the way up to 100%, even higher if you want. And they just tell you how many plates to put in there, how thick, the diameter, and whatnot. And that's how you adjust your main valving. That's how you do it on this bypass shock, but it would be exactly the same. This is the same setup if it was just a regular old shock absorber. That portion of the bypass is no different than a regular shock absorber. I don't know if you guys caught what I did there, but I made sure when I pushed this seal in that I didn't go too far down. So I'm close enough that these Allen screws are able to grab a hold of it, and then as I tighten them down, and I'll tighten them down evenly, they're going to pull it up until it seats against that little clip that I put in there. Now, if you do happen to put it in there, and you go too far and the screws can't reach it, you can also pressurize it at the reservoir with like 50 psi of nitrogen, or usually when I'm just working on the shocks like this, I just use regular air. If you charged it with some air, then as the air would go in there, it would put pressure on the fluid, and it would actually push that piston up as well. So you've got some options, but if you're careful and you're able to grab it like I did, that's the easiest way to do it. Originally, when I got these, I wasn't even thinking that this was a check valve. It never even crossed my mind. And I kind of thought it was just a needle valve, kind of like a big carburetor jet. And as you turned it out, it would allow more fluid to come through. But I've already taken it apart and I've seen what's in there. So let's take this apart so that I can show you guys and we can get an idea of what this actually does when you turn it in or turn it out. So because I have this propped up on an angle like this, and because I don't have any air pressure or nitrogen on here, I think I can back this out and a little bit of fluid will come out, but I don't think it'll be a gusher or anything like that. So I can't get my socket on here enough with this as it is. So what I'm going to do is turn this all the way in, or most of the way in. Okay, that should be good. And then these are not all that tight. All right. Well, okay, they were a little tighter than I thought, but that's all right. Okay. All right, now that I've got that loose, I'm going to back this all the way out because that should take pressure off of this nut. All right, here's the first piece. Then there's a spring. Right here. So what we have is we have this valve and the spring pushes against the valve, and then this piece pushes on the spring, and as you adjust this in or out, it pushes this piece further closer, so it preloads the spring more. As a matter of fact, you can take it so that you practically bottom it out like that. And if you did that, then the spring is taken out of the equation and basically you've completely shut off the bypass portion. And if you thread it all the way out, then it extends the spring as much as it can. It still has some pressure on it, but it extends it. And so it requires the least amount of pressure to push the spring off of its seat. And the seat is back here. So when this is in there like this valve is pushed up against its seat in here, and that's why it's a check valve, because when the fluid pressure comes up going backwards, all it does is pushes this valve closer on its seal, and that makes it a check valve. So when the piston's traveling in the opposite direction, these don't let any fluid through. But when the fluid is trying to be pushed this way, then it just pushes the spring back off of its seat and allows the fluid to go right back to the other side of the piston. And how much it allows it to do that depends on how much you've got this threaded in or out, because that determines how much preload this is putting on the spring. So let's put this back together, and then I'll do a little example for you guys so that you can see the difference when you crank these in or out. Now, since we're going to do some testing with this and I'm going to be extending it and pushing it in, I want to put some air in there. And first thing I need to do is put my little Schrader back in. If you remember, I took that out at the very beginning. So I got that back in there. And then I've got my little fitting here that goes on the end of the Schrader. And this is an air hose that has 50 psi of just compressed air behind it. I'm sure I'll be tweaking with these more before I'm actually out on the trail. So I don't want to be wasting my nitrogen filling this up. So when we open this up, I now have 50 psi of pressure on here, and when I turn this screw, it's going to push in the Schrader. I don't know if you guys saw that, but this cup actually pushed the rest of the way out. And now there's 50 pounds of air in this remote reservoir. And now I should be good to go to extend the piston and play around with it a little bit. And again, remember, when I set this up to actually go off-roading with it, I'll charge this with 200 psi of nitrogen. All right, now I need to extend this. Oh, that's not easy. All right, so right now I've got all three of the bypasses, although we're not playing with the droop or the extension bypass, but that is turned out as well. All three of them are turned out, which means they have the least amount of spring pressure on them as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lean on this shock absorber and I'm going to compress it as hard as I can. And what should happen is that should be enough pressure to push those valves off of the seals and allow the bypasses to let the fluid just bypass the piston and allow the piston to travel faster. And then as the piston works its way up and gets to the first port, as soon as the piston covers up the port, I don't know if you guys will be able to see this. I think I'll be able to hear the valve kind of as it seats itself, and then it should slow down a little bit. And then as I hit the second one, it should slow down even more. Although these ports are so close to the end of the travel, I don't know if you guys will see that. But regardless, I'm going to lean on this as hard as I can, and let's see if we can see anything. I know that I can feel it because I've done this about 100 times because it's pretty fun actually. But I don't know if you guys will be able to see it, but let's see. I'm going to extend it so we can do it one more time. Well, I tell you what, it's a good workout, if nothing else. Okay, so same thing. Everything is out as loose as it can be. So I'm going to push on it again. Should travel quick. Hopefully you'll see it slow down and then slow down more. All right. Now I'm going to take the two compression valves and I'm going to turn them in. Since we're trying to get results here, I'm going to turn them in all the way. So this will essentially pretty much make it so that almost nothing gets past the bypass valve, which basically should make this entire compression stroke much, much slower than what you guys just saw. All right, so this one is with the bypasses closed as much as they can. So let's see how it goes. Okay, obviously you can see that that's much slower, and as the piston passed these two ports, I can kind of feel it a little bit, but there's no change in resistance. Alright guys, so that's it for this video. We did a full teardown, basically, or an inspection teardown, whatever you want to call it. We took the vital parts apart so that we fully, and when I mean fully, I mean 100%. There's a big difference between understanding how something works and what I call 100% understanding how something works. And I know that extremely well. I used to be an air conditioning technician, and there was a big difference when I walked up to a piece of equipment and I understood how it works, or if I walked up to a piece of equipment that I installed or that I had previously worked on or was just extremely familiar with that brand, I 100% knew how that thing worked, and it was very easy for me to diagnose it. It's the same exact thing with our off-road vehicles or whatever. Once you tear it apart and you 100% understand how it works, as I'm tuning this shock absorber, if it's behaving one way and I want it to behave another way, now that I know physically what everything is doing in the shock absorber, it makes it a lot easier to, number one, adjust it and get it performing the way you want to, and number two, troubleshoot if you're having some problems. Like, now that we completely understand what's happening in these, if it's doing something that seems odd or weird, it's easier to figure out what the problem is, knowing what everything's doing. It might seem kind of silly because this is just a shock absorber, and you know, why would you want to, but regardless, that's just how I am. So anyways, now we fully understand how these bypasses work. Other manufacturers' bypasses will work the same. There will be some minor differences in how their valving works and how some things are secured in place, but pretty much it'll be exactly the same, where that's a check valve and it'll have a spring behind it or somehow putting pressure. But either way, since these are the ones going in ratchet, I wanted to know exactly how these work, and now I do, and now you do. Remember, these are Locked Offroad shock absorbers. So that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Hopefully it's helping you with whatever you're working on, and hopefully I see you on the next video. Take care.